The scent of sage and wildflowers filled the warm Arizona air as Nathan Reynolds guided his mare through the rocky terrain just outside Mineral Park. His eyes scanning the horizon for strays from the herd he managed for the Patterson Ranch. What he found instead made him pull his horse to an abrupt stop, his breath catching in his throat at the sight of a young woman kneeling among a patch of Indian paintbrush and desert marigolds, her hands gently gathering the vibrant blooms into a worn wicker basket. It was late spring in 1882, and the desert had exploded into unexpected color after the winter rains, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost magical. The woman wore a simple calico dress the color of cream, her dark hair falling in waves down her back, catching the afternoon sunlight. She seemed completely unaware of his presence, humming softly to herself as she worked, and Nathan felt his heart hammer against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. He should ride on. He had work to do, cattle to find, and no business disturbing a stranger. But something about the peaceful scene held him frozen in place, and when she finally looked up, her eyes meeting his across the distance, he knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. "I apologize for startling you, miss," Nathan called out, removing his hat respectfully. "I did not mean to intrude." The woman stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt, her expression cautious but not fearful. "You did not startle me," she replied, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I heard your horse some minutes ago." Nathan dismounted, leading his mare forward a few steps, but maintaining a respectful distance. "Are you out here alone? This country can be dangerous for someone traveling without protection." "I am not far from town," she said, gesturing toward the cluster of buildings visible in the distance. "And I have been picking flowers since I was a child. I know how to watch for rattlesnakes and scorpions." "It is not the wildlife that concerns me most," Nathan said carefully. "There are men who pass through these parts who would not think twice about taking advantage of a woman alone." She tilted her head, studying him with frank curiosity. "And yet you stopped when you saw me. Should I be concerned about you?" The directness of her question surprised him into a genuine laugh. "No, miss. I work for the Patterson Ranch, and my mother raised me to respect women, not frighten them. My name is Nathan Reynolds." "Josephine Sterling," she said, and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "And I suppose I should thank you for your concern, even if I do not particularly need a protector." "I can see that," Nathan agreed, charmed by her independence despite himself. "Those are beautiful flowers you have gathered. Are they for a special occasion?" Josephine looked down at her basket, and her expression softened. "My mother loved wildflowers. She passed 3 months ago, and I try to keep fresh blooms in the house to remember her by. It is a small thing, but it brings me comfort." The grief in her voice was raw enough that Nathan felt it in his own chest. "I am sorry for your loss. I lost my father 2 years back, and there are still days when I turn to tell him something and remember he is gone." "Yes," Josephine said quietly. "Exactly like that." They stood in silence for a moment, the shared understanding of loss creating an unexpected bridge between them. A hawk cried overhead, circling on the thermal currents, and Nathan watched as Josephine tracked its flight with her eyes. "You live in Mineral Park?" he asked, not ready to let her walk away just yet. "For now," she replied, and there was something in those 2 words that made him frown. "For now? Are you planning to leave?" Josephine bent to pick one more flower, a brilliant orange bloom that she added to her collection. "My mother and I came here 5 years ago after my father died. She had a sister here, but my aunt passed last year. Without family, there is little to keep me in Mineral Park. I have been considering moving to Prescott, or perhaps even California, where there might be better opportunities for employment." Nathan felt an unexpected surge of panic at the thought of her leaving, which was absurd considering he had known her for all of 5 minutes. "What kind of employment are you seeking?" "I can sew, cook, keep house, teach children their letters," Josephine said, lifting one shoulder in a small shrug. "My mother made sure I had practical skills. I have been working at the boarding house since she died, but Mrs. Hendricks has family coming from back east who will take over my position in a few weeks. After that, I will need to find something else or move on." An idea formed in Nathan's mind, reckless and impulsive but feeling somehow right. "The Patterson Ranch could use someone with your skills. Mrs. Patterson has been complaining for months about needing help with the cooking and cleaning, and with the hands always tearing their clothes and equipment. Someone who can sew would be valuable. It is not glamorous work, but the pay is fair and you would have your own cabin." Josephine's eyes widened slightly. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Reynolds? You know nothing about me beyond my name." "I know you are brave enough to venture out alone, practical enough to gather wildflowers instead of buying them, and honest enough to tell a stranger you do not need his protection," Nathan said. "And I know that you loved your mother enough to honor her memory with small gestures. Those qualities speak well of your character. Those qualities could also describe 100 other women," Josephine pointed out, but he could see interest flickering in her expression. "Perhaps," Nathan acknowledged, "but those 100 other women are not standing here in front of me. You are. And if you are looking for a reason to stay in Mineral Park instead of venturing off to unknown places where you have no connections, this could be it." "Why do you care whether I stay or go?" Josephine asked bluntly. "You do not know me." Nathan met her gaze steadily, knowing he should probably guard his feelings better but finding himself unable to lie. "I do not have a good answer for that. But from the moment I saw you kneeling in those flowers, something in my chest told me I needed to at least try to convince you to stay. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I would be a bigger fool if I let you walk away without making the effort." Color rose in Josephine's cheeks and she looked away, focusing on adjusting the flowers in her basket. "That is quite forward of you, Mr. Reynolds." "I know," Nathan said. "And I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable. But life is short and uncertain out here, and I learned when I lost my father that sometimes you do not get a second chance to say what needs saying." Josephine was quiet for a long moment, and Nathan forced himself to wait, to let her think without pressing further. He could see her weighing options, considering possibilities, and he found himself holding his breath. "I would need to speak with Mrs. Patterson myself before agreeing to anything," she finally said. "And I would want to see the cabin and understand exactly what would be expected of me." Relief flooded through Nathan so powerfully he had to resist the urge to shout. "Of course. Would you allow me to escort you to the ranch tomorrow? I could introduce you properly, and you could make your decision from there." "Tomorrow is Sunday," Josephine said. "I attend services in the morning." "Then, after services," Nathan suggested, "I could meet you in town and we could ride out together." "You assume I would accept a ride from a man I just met," Josephine said, but there was amusement in her voice now. "I assume nothing," Nathan replied. "I am hoping you will trust that my intentions are honorable and that I am genuinely trying to help, not harm." Josephine studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. I will meet you outside the church at noon. But if anything about this arrangement feels improper or unsafe, I will leave immediately." "I would expect nothing less," Nathan said, replacing his hat. "And Miss Sterling, thank you for giving me this chance." "I have not agreed to anything yet," she reminded him, but her smile took the sting from the words. Nathan watched as she gathered her basket and began walking back toward town, her figure gradually disappearing into the shimmering heat. He remained standing there long after she was gone, wondering what madness had possessed him to speak so openly to a complete stranger. But when he finally mounted his horse and continued his search for the stray cattle, he found himself whistling, his heart lighter than it had been in months. The next morning, Nathan woke before dawn and spent extra time making sure he was presentable. He shaved carefully, put on his best shirt, and even used some of the hair tonic his mother had sent him for Christmas. The other ranch hands noticed his unusual attention to grooming and teased him mercilessly over breakfast. But Nathan took it all in good humor, too nervous and excited to care about their ribbing. He arrived in Mineral Park well before noon and found himself pacing outside the small church, checking his pocket watch every few minutes. The service let out at 11:30, and Nathan scanned the emerging crowd for Josephine, his stomach knotting with worry that she might have changed her mind. Then he saw her, wearing a blue dress that made her eyes look like the summer sky, a simple bonnet shading her face. She was speaking with an older woman, listening intently to whatever was being said, and Nathan hung back, not wanting to interrupt. When Josephine finally excused herself and walked toward him, he felt that same jolt of recognition he had experienced the day before. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him, "you are punctual." "I did not want to keep you waiting," Nathan said. "Are you still willing to visit the ranch?" "I am," Josephine confirmed, "though I must confess I barely slept last night wondering if I was making a terrible mistake." "If at any point you feel you are, just say the word and I will bring you straight back to town," Nathan promised. He had borrowed a wagon from the ranch for the journey, knowing it would be more appropriate than having Josephine ride behind him on his horse. She accepted his hand to climb up onto the seat, and they set off toward the Patterson spread, which lay about 5 miles northeast of Mineral Park. "Tell me about the Pattersons," Josephine said as they rattled along the dusty road. "How long have you worked for them?" 3 years now," Nathan replied. "Mr. Patterson is fair but firm, and he knows cattle as well as any man I have met. Mrs. Patterson is kind, though she works harder than she should for a woman her age. They have 2 sons who help run the ranch, both married with children of their own. It is a good place, honest work with honest pay. And you enjoy it, working with cattle." Nathan considered the question seriously. "I do. There is something satisfying about the work, even when it is difficult. I grew up on a small ranch in New Mexico territory, so this life is what I know. After my father died, my mother moved to live with my sister in Santa Fe, but I wanted to stay in ranch work. Mr. Patterson gave me a chance when I showed up looking for employment, and I have been grateful ever since." "You miss your mother and sister." "Every day," Nathan admitted. "But we write letters, and I visit when I can. Family is important, but so is building your own life, making your own way." Josephine nodded thoughtfully. "My mother used to say something similar. She said that loving someone meant wanting them to grow, even if that growth took them away from you." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Josephine said softly. "I wish you could have met her. She would have liked you, I think." The comment pleased Nathan more than it probably should have, and they continued the journey in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by observations about the landscape or questions about the ranch. As they crested a rise and the Patterson spread came into view, Nathan watched Josephine's face for her reaction. The ranch was not the largest in the area, but it was well maintained, with sturdy buildings and healthy cattle grazing in the distance. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch, and beyond it were the bunkhouse, barns, corrals, and several smaller cabins for married workers or specialized staff. "It is bigger than I expected," Josephine said. "Mr. Patterson has worked hard to build this place," Nathan said with obvious pride. "And he treats his workers well, which is why most of us stay." He guided the wagon toward the main house, where Mrs. Patterson was already emerging onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with gray streaking her dark hair and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. "Nathan," she called out, "you are back early from town, and you brought a guest." Nathan helped Josephine down from the wagon, then removed his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Josephine Sterling. I mentioned to her that you were looking for help with the household, and she has agreed to consider the position." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose, but she smiled warmly. "Did you now? Well, Miss Sterling, it is a pleasure to meet you. Please, come inside out of this sun and we can talk properly." The interior of the house was cool and spacious, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the heat. Mrs. Patterson led them to a large kitchen where bread was rising on the counter and the smell of coffee filled the air. "Sit, both of you," Mrs. Patterson commanded, already pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs. "Now, Miss Sterling, tell me about yourself." Josephine sat straight in her chair, hands folded in her lap, and Nathan could see her gathering her composure. "I am 20 years old, Mrs. Patterson. I have been living in Mineral Park for 5 years with my mother, who passed 3 months ago. Since then, I have been working at Mrs. Hendrick's boarding house, but that position will end soon due to her family arriving from the East. I can cook, clean, sew, and manage household accounts. I am healthy, hardworking, and reliable. Can you cook for 15 men at a time?" Mrs. Patterson asked bluntly. "I have not done so regularly, but I managed the kitchen at the boarding house when Mrs. Hendricks was ill last year, cooking for 12 guests plus the family. I believe I could adapt to 15 with proper planning." "The men will complain no matter what you serve them," Mrs. Patterson said with a slight smile, "but they will complain less if the food is hot and plentiful. What about mending? Can you patch work clothes and repair tack?" "I can sew most anything," Josephine confirmed. "My mother taught me, and I have been doing alterations and repairs for extra money since I was 14. Mrs. Patterson nodded, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "The cabin is small but private. You would have your own space, which I imagine is important to a young woman. The work is hard, Miss Sterling, I will not lie about that. The days are long, especially during roundup and branding. But the pay is fair. You would have Sundays off to attend church, and you would be safe here. My husband runs a tight operation, and any man who caused trouble for a woman under our protection would find himself looking for work elsewhere very quickly." "I appreciate your candor," Josephine said. "Might I see the cabin before making my decision?" "Of course." Mrs. Patterson stood, setting down her mug. "Nathan, why do you not show Miss Sterling the cabin while I finish my baking? Come back to the house when you are done, and we can discuss terms if she is interested." Nathan led Josephine out of the main house and across the yard to a small adobe cabin situated a respectful distance from both the bunkhouse and the main residence. It had a single room with a narrow bed, a small table and chair, a chest for storage, and a fireplace for cooking and heat. A window looked out over the desert, and someone had planted hollyhocks beside the door, their stalks reaching hopefully toward the sky. "It is modest," Nathan said, suddenly seeing the space through her eyes and worrying it might not be enough. But Josephine walked slowly around the room, running her hand over the furniture, testing the bed, looking out the window. "It has good light," she said finally, "and the walls are thick enough to keep out the heat. I could make this comfortable." "You could," Nathan agreed. "And you would be welcome at the main house any evening if you wanted company. Mrs. Patterson hosts a gathering every Friday night for anyone who wants to come, just conversation and sometimes music." Josephine turned to face him, and in the dim light of the cabin, her expression was serious. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Reynolds? Truly. You do not know me, and yet you are going to considerable effort to help me." Nathan stepped closer, not so close as to crowd her, but enough that she could see the sincerity in his face. "I told you yesterday that something in me recognized you when I saw you in those flowers. I know that sounds fanciful, maybe even foolish. But I am 24 years old, and I have never felt anything like what I felt in that moment. It was not just attraction, though I would be lying if I said you were not beautiful. It was more like recognition, like my soul knew yours even though we had never met." Josephine's breath caught, and her eyes searched his face. "That is a dangerous thing to say to a woman you barely know." "I know," Nathan said quietly. "And I am not asking for anything from you beyond a chance to get to know you better. If you take this position, I will respect the professional nature of the arrangement. But I hope that over time, you might come to feel even a fraction of what I already feel for you. And if you do not, if you decide I am just a foolish cowboy with romantic notions, then I will accept that and step back. But at least you will have a job and a place to stay, which is something concrete regardless of what happens between us." "You are asking me to upend my plans based on feelings you have had for one day," Josephine said, but her voice was soft, not accusatory. "I am asking you to give this place a chance," Nathan corrected. "Give the job a chance, and maybe, if you are willing, give me a chance too." Josephine moved to the window, staring out at the landscape bathed in afternoon light. Nathan waited, forcing himself to remain patient even as his heart hammered against his ribs. When she finally turned back to him, he could see that she had made a decision. "I will take the position," she said. "On a trial basis, at least initially. If Mrs. Patterson and I agree on terms, I will work here for 3 months. At the end of that time, we can both assess whether the arrangement is working." "And what about me?" Nathan asked, unable to help himself. "Are you willing to give me a chance as well?" A small smile played at Josephine's lips. "I suppose we will find out over the next 3 months, will we not?" It was not quite the answer Nathan had hoped for, but it was enough. It was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were all you needed. They returned to the main house, where Josephine and Mrs. Patterson negotiated terms while Nathan waited outside, too nervous to sit still. When Josephine finally emerged, her expression was neutral, and for a terrible moment Nathan thought she had changed her mind. Then she smiled, and relief washed over him. "I will start in 2 weeks," she said. "That will give me time to finish my obligations at the boarding house and prepare for the move." "I will help you transport your belongings," Nathan offered immediately. "That would be appreciated," Josephine said. "I do not have much, but there are a few pieces of furniture from my mother that I would like to bring if possible." They made arrangements for Nathan to collect her on the appointed day, and then he drove her back to Mineral Park, both of them quieter on the return journey. When they reached the boarding house, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, holding her hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you," Josephine said. "For yesterday, for today, for all of this." "I should be thanking you," Nathan replied, "for being brave enough to say yes." "I suppose we will see how brave I truly am," Josephine said, but her eyes were warm. 2 weeks, Mr. Reynolds. 2 weeks, Miss Sterling." Nathan watched her go inside, then turned the wagon back toward the ranch, his mind already counting down the days. The next 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness for Nathan. He threw himself into his work, trying to keep busy enough that time would move faster. But every night he lay awake thinking about Josephine, wondering if she was having second thoughts, fearing she might change her mind. He considered riding into town to check on her, but worried that would seem too eager, too desperate. Instead, he wrote her a letter, something he had never done for any woman before, telling her about his day and asking about hers, trying to strike a balance between friendly and interested. To his surprise and delight, she wrote back. Her letter was careful, almost formal, but she shared details about her final days at the boarding house and asked intelligent questions about the ranch. Nathan responded immediately, and over the course of those 2 weeks, they exchanged 4 letters, each one slightly warmer and more personal than the last. When the appointed day finally arrived, Nathan woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. He borrowed the wagon again, this time with Mr. Patterson's explicit permission and knowing grin, and headed to Mineral Park with a sense of anticipation that bordered on euphoria. Josephine was waiting outside the boarding house with her belongings packed into 3 worn trunks and a few pieces of wrapped furniture. Mrs. Hendricks stood with her, and when Nathan approached, the older woman gave him a stern look. "You are the young man who convinced Josephine to stay, Mrs. Hendricks said. "I hope you know what you are doing, Mr. Reynolds. She is a good girl, and she deserves to be treated with respect." "I know, madam," Nathan said seriously, "and I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure she is safe and happy, Mrs. Hendricks studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "See that you do." She turned to Josephine and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You write to me, you hear, and if anything goes wrong, you come straight back here. You will always have a place with me." "Thank you," Josephine said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Nathan loaded Josephine's belongings into the wagon, taking care with the furniture pieces that had belonged to her mother. There was a rocking chair, a small writing desk, and a framed mirror, all showing signs of age and travel but clearly well loved. When everything was secured, he helped Josephine up onto the seat, and they set off toward the ranch. "Are you nervous?" Nathan asked after they had been traveling for a few minutes. "Terrified," Josephine admitted, "but also excited." "Is that strange?" "Not at all," Nathan said. "I think the best things in life are usually a little frightening. They matter too much not to be." They talked easily during the journey, the letters having broken some of the initial awkwardness between them. Nathan learned that Josephine loved to read, that she had a talent for sketching, that she had always wanted to see the ocean but had never traveled further west than Arizona. Josephine learned that Nathan had a younger sister he adored, that he had broken his arm twice doing foolish things on horseback, that he dreamed of someday owning his own small ranch. When they reached the Patterson spread, several of the ranch hands were waiting to help unload the wagon. They were polite but curious, and Nathan made introductions quickly, wanting to establish that Josephine was under the protection of the ranch and should be treated accordingly. Mrs. Patterson had cleaned the cabin thoroughly and added small touches: a rag rug beside the bed, fresh curtains on the window, a jar of wildflowers on the table. Josephine pressed a hand to her mouth when she saw it, clearly moved by the thoughtfulness. "She is a good woman," Nathan said quietly as they arranged Josephine's furniture. "They both are, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. You will be safe here." "I am beginning to believe that," Josephine said. Nathan helped her settle in, then reluctantly took his leave, knowing she needed time and space to make the cabin her own. But over the following days and weeks, he found excuses to be near the main house more often, timing his meals to coincide with hers, volunteering for any task that might bring them into contact. Josephine adapted to ranch life with impressive speed. She woke before dawn to start breakfast for the hands, worked through the day on cleaning, mending, and meal preparation, and often did not finish until after dark. It was exhausting work, but she never complained, and Nathan watched with growing admiration as she won over even the most skeptical of the ranch workers with her competence and good humor. On Sundays, Nathan drove Josephine into town for church services, and these trips became the highlight of his week. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing books they had read, debating the future of the territory. Nathan found himself falling more deeply in love with every conversation, enchanted by her sharp mind and kind heart. 6 weeks after Josephine arrived at the ranch, Nathan finally worked up the courage to ask if he could court her formally. They were returning from church, the wagon rattling along the familiar road when he pulled the horses to a stop in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Is something wrong?" Josephine asked, concern in her voice. "No," Nathan said quickly. "Nothing is wrong. I just wanted to talk to you about something, and I thought it would be better to stop than to try to have this conversation while driving." Josephine turned to face him, her expression curious. "What is it?" Nathan removed his hat, turning it in his hands, suddenly more nervous than he had been facing down an angry steer. "I know we agreed that you would take this position on a trial basis, and I have tried to respect the professional nature of our relationship. But it has been 6 weeks now, and every day I am more certain that what I felt when I first saw you was real. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Josephine. You are smart and strong and kind, and being near you makes me want to be a better man." He paused, gathering his courage, then continued. "I would like permission to court you properly. I know it is complicated because we work on the same ranch, and I know you might not feel the same way about me. But I had to ask, because the thought of not asking, of letting this opportunity pass by, is unbearable." Josephine was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Nathan's heart sank as the silence stretched, and he began to brace himself for rejection. Then she smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to ask." Nathan's breath left him in a rush. "You were, of course," Josephine said. "Did you think I did not notice how you time your meals to match mine? Or how you always volunteer for tasks that bring you near the house? Nathan, you are not exactly subtle." "So that is a yes?" Nathan asked, hardly daring to believe it. "You are saying yes?" "I am saying yes," Josephine confirmed. "I have feelings for you too, Nathan. I have been developing them since that first day when you stopped your horse and looked at me like I was the most important thing in the world. But I wanted to be sure, to give it time, to make certain this was not just loneliness or convenience. And you are sure now?" "I am sure," Josephine said softly. "You are a good man, Nathan Reynolds. You have proven that every day in 100 small ways. So yes, you have my permission to court me." Nathan wanted to shout, to grab her and spin her around, to do something dramatic and romantic. But they were sitting in a wagon on a public road, so instead he took her hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You have made me the happiest man in Arizona territory," he said. Josephine laughed, the sound like music. "That seems like an exaggeration." "It is the absolute truth," Nathan insisted. They continued to the ranch, and when Nathan helped Josephine down from the wagon, he held her hand longer than necessary, reluctant to break the contact. She squeezed his fingers before letting go, her eyes promising that this was just the beginning. The next few months were the happiest of Nathan's life. He and Josephine spent every possible moment together, always properly chaperoned, always mindful of propriety, but growing closer with each passing day. They took walks in the evening after her work was done, exploring the land around the ranch, and Josephine showed Nathan the different wildflowers that grew in each season, teaching him their names and properties. Nathan taught Josephine to ride better, patient and encouraging as she gained confidence in the saddle. They rode out together on Sunday afternoons, picnicking by a small creek that ran through the Patterson property, talking for hours about their hopes and dreams. As autumn arrived and the heat broke, the ranch prepared for the fall roundup. It was the busiest time of year, with all hands needed for the grueling work of gathering and sorting the cattle. Nathan knew he would have less time for Josephine during these weeks, and the thought bothered him more than the hard work ahead. "I will miss our evening walks," he told her the night before the roundup began. They were standing outside her cabin, the stars brilliant overhead, the air finally cool enough to be pleasant. "I will miss them too," Josephine said. "But the work is important and I understand that. Besides, I will be just as busy cooking for all of you, so perhaps it is for the best that we are both occupied." "When this is over," Nathan said, taking both her hands in his, "I want to talk to you about our future. Will you promise to hear me out when the time comes?" Josephine looked up at him, her face soft in the starlight. "I promise." Nathan wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his whole body ached with the desire, but they had agreed to take things slowly, to do everything properly. So instead, he simply squeezed her hands and bid her good night, walking back to the bunkhouse with his heart full. The roundup was as difficult as expected, long days in the saddle under the harsh sun, wrestling with ornery cattle and sleeping rough on the range. But Nathan worked with purpose, knowing that the sooner they finished, the sooner he could return to Josephine. He had been saving his wages carefully, and hidden in his trunk at the bunkhouse was a small velvet box containing a simple gold ring. He had purchased it 2 weeks earlier during a trip to Prescott, already knowing in his heart that Josephine was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. On the 4th day of the roundup, one of the younger hands got careless and ended up being thrown from his horse, breaking his collarbone. The injury was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough that someone needed to ride back to the ranch to get help. Nathan volunteered immediately, partly because it was the responsible thing to do and partly because it meant he would get to see Josephine, even if only briefly. He rode hard through the afternoon, reaching the ranch as the sun was setting. Mrs. Patterson took charge of arrangements for the injured man, sending her oldest son back with the wagon while Nathan cleaned up quickly and headed to the main house, knowing Josephine would be finishing the dinner preparations. She was at the stove when he entered, stirring a large pot of stew, and the look of surprise and joy on her face when she saw him made the hard ride worthwhile. "Nathan, what are you doing here? Is something wrong?" He explained about the accident, assuring her that the young man would recover, then added, "I have to ride back out first thing in the morning, but I wanted to see you, even if just for a few minutes." Josephine set down her spoon and crossed to him, and without thinking, Nathan pulled her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucking under his chin, and they stood there for a long moment, just holding each other. "I have hated being away from you," Nathan murmured into her hair. "I have hated it too," Josephine admitted. "The days feel longer when I cannot talk to you in the evenings." Nathan pulled back slightly, looking down at her. "I know we said we would wait, that we would take our time, but life is uncertain and I do not want to waste any more of it. Josephine, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you picking wildflowers, and I will love you until the day I die." Josephine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Nathan. So much it frightens me sometimes." "Then marry me," Nathan said, the words tumbling out before he had planned them. "Not today, not even this month if you are not ready, but say you will marry me, say you will be my wife, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." "Yes," Josephine breathed. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." This time Nathan did not hold back. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Josephine kissed him back, her arms coming around his neck, and for a perfect moment the world consisted of nothing but the two of them. When they finally broke apart, both slightly dazed, Nathan remembered the ring. "I have something for you. It is in my trunk at the bunkhouse. Let me go get it." But Josephine caught his hand. "Later. Right now I just want to stand here with you and let this moment be real." So they stood together in the ranch kitchen, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools, until Mrs. Patterson walked in and stopped short at the sight of them. "Well," she said, a knowing smile spreading across her face, "I suppose congratulations are in order." Nathan and Josephine explained, and Mrs. Patterson immediately began planning, talking about where they could hold the ceremony and when would be best. Nathan retrieved the ring from his trunk while Josephine finished her work, and when he slipped it onto her finger later that evening, she cried and kissed him again, and he thought his heart might actually burst from happiness. He rode back to the roundup the next morning with a lighter heart than he had ever known, and when the work finally finished a week later, he returned to find that Josephine and Mrs. Patterson had already made significant progress on wedding plans. They decided to marry in early December, giving them 2 months to prepare. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Mineral Park, followed by a celebration at the ranch for all the workers and their families. Josephine wrote to Nathan's mother and sister, inviting them to attend, and to Nathan's joy, they accepted. His mother writing that she was thrilled her son had found such a wonderful woman. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Josephine sewed her own dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had helped her purchase in Prescott. Nathan worked extra hours to save more money, wanting to make sure they had a solid foundation to start their married life. Mr. Patterson, in a show of generosity that moved Nathan deeply, offered them a slightly larger cabin on the ranch property, one with 2 rooms and space for a future family. Nathan's mother and sister arrived 3 days before the wedding, traveling by stage from Santa Fe. Nathan had not seen them in over a year, and the reunion was emotional, his mother crying and his sister teasing him about finally settling down. They fell in love with Josephine immediately, and Nathan felt a deep sense of contentment watching the women he loved most in the world getting along so well. The night before the wedding, Nathan lay awake in the bunkhouse, too excited to sleep. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the random chance that had led him to ride past that particular patch of wildflowers on that particular day. If he had taken a different route, if he had been delayed by even a few minutes, he might never have met Josephine. The thought made him appreciate even more the precious gift he had been given. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sky a brilliant blue. Nathan dressed in his best suit, his hands shaking slightly as he fumbled with his collar. His mother helped him, her eyes suspiciously bright as she fussed over him. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered. "You have become such a good man, Nathan." "I hope so," Nathan said. "I want to be worthy of her." "You already are," his mother assured him. The church in Mineral Park was small but beautifully decorated, Josephine having enlisted several of the other ranch women to help her gather and arrange fall foliage and the last of the season's wildflowers. Nathan stood at the front with the preacher, his heart hammering as he waited. Then the door opened and Josephine appeared, and Nathan forgot how to breathe. She was radiant in her ivory dress, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style, a simple crown of flowers adorning her head. She held a bouquet of wildflowers, the same varieties she had been gathering that first day they met, and when her eyes found his across the length of the church, she smiled with such pure happiness that Nathan felt tears prick his own eyes. Her walk down the aisle seemed to take forever and no time at all. When she finally reached his side, Nathan took her hand, squeezing gently, and together they turned to face the preacher. The ceremony was traditional but heartfelt. They recited their vows with voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife and Nathan was given permission to kiss his bride, he did so with all the love and tenderness he possessed, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration at the ranch that followed was boisterous and joyful. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Patterson and several other women. Someone produced a fiddle and another a guitar, and soon there was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Nathan kept Josephine close, his arm around her waist, unable to stop touching her now that she was finally, truly his. As evening fell and the celebrations continued, Nathan pulled Josephine away for a few moments of quiet. They walked to the place where their new cabin stood, the one Mr. Patterson had given them, and stood outside looking at it in the gathering dusk. "This is ours," Josephine said wonderingly. "Our home. The first of many things we will build together," Nathan said. He turned her to face him, taking both her hands. "I know I have already said this, but I need to say it again. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger who stopped his horse to talk to a woman picking wildflowers. Thank you for staying, for giving Mineral Park another chance, for giving me a chance. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "You picked up the courage to ask me to stay," Josephine said, echoing his words from that first day. "That took bravery, Nathan. And I am so grateful you did. I was lost after my mother died, drifting without purpose or direction. But you gave me a reason to stay, and then you gave me a reason to hope. You have been my anchor and my compass, and I love you more than words can express." They kissed again, soft and slow, the sounds of the celebration fading into background noise. When they finally broke apart, Josephine rested her head against Nathan's chest, and he held her close, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "You think we will always be this happy?" Josephine asked quietly. "I think we will have challenges," Nathan said honestly. "Life is never easy and there will be difficult times ahead. But I also think that if we face those challenges together, if we hold on to this love we have found, then yes, we will always find our way back to happiness." "That is a good answer," Josephine said. They eventually rejoined the celebration, dancing and laughing with their friends and family until late into the night. When the last guest finally departed, and Nathan carried Josephine over the threshold of their new cabin, both of them were exhausted but glowing with joy. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment but a happy one. Nathan continued his work with the cattle, and Josephine continued helping Mrs. Patterson with the household, though now she did so from a position of greater independence, having her own home to maintain as well. They fell into comfortable routines, eating breakfast together before work, stealing moments throughout the day when their paths crossed, spending their evenings in their cabin talking and planning for the future. Winter passed into spring, and as the desert bloomed again with wildflowers, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Are you certain?" Nathan asked, his voice full of wonder. "As certain as I can be," Josephine said. "I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Josephine asked, though she could feel his joy in the way he held her. "Happy does not even begin to describe it," Nathan said. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I cannot believe how blessed I am." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Josephine had some difficult days, particularly in the early months. Nathan was attentive and caring, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. As her belly grew and the reality of impending parenthood became more tangible, they spent their evenings preparing the second room of their cabin as a nursery. Nathan building a cradle from smooth pine while Josephine sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Nathan's mother and sister visited again in early autumn, timing their arrival to help with the birth. Josephine went into labor on a clear October morning, and Nathan paced outside the cabin for hours while his mother and sister assisted with the delivery. When he finally heard the first cry of his child, he nearly collapsed with relief. His mother emerged from the cabin, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Nathan. A beautiful, healthy boy." Nathan rushed inside to find Josephine propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she whispered. Nathan approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the small red face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect features, and when his eyes fluttered open briefly, Nathan saw that they were blue. "He is perfect," Nathan breathed. "You are perfect." "I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Josephine corrected softly. "He is ours, Nathan, our son." They had already chosen a name, deciding weeks earlier. "Welcome to the world, Michael Reynolds," Nathan said, gently touching his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed reflexively around Nathan's thumb, and the simple gesture filled Nathan with fierce protective love. The next few weeks were exhausting but wonderful. Nathan took on extra help from the other ranch hands so he could spend more time at home, learning how to care for his son. Michael was a good baby, healthy and growing steadily, though the sleepless nights took their toll on both parents. But even in their exhaustion, Nathan and Josephine found moments of perfect happiness. Late-night feedings where they sat together in the dim cabin, taking turns holding Michael and marveling at what they had created. Early morning walks where Nathan carried his son outside to watch the sunrise, telling him about the ranch and the land. Quiet evenings where Josephine hummed lullabies while Nathan held them both, feeling like the luckiest man alive. As Michael grew from infant to toddler, he proved to have his mother's gentle nature and his father's adventurous spirit. He took his first steps on the porch of their cabin, lurching toward Nathan with determined concentration while Josephine watched with her hands pressed to her mouth. His first word was "Mama," which secretly pleased Josephine immensely, though she pretended not to notice Nathan's mock indignation. When Michael was 2 years old, Josephine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, her body more tired from chasing a toddler while carrying another child. But Nathan was there every step of the way, taking over more of the child care duties in the evenings, insisting Josephine rest whenever possible. Their daughter was born in late spring, arriving quickly and with less drama than her brother. She had Josephine's dark hair and Nathan's hazel eyes, and when Nathan held her for the first time, he was struck by how different it felt from holding Michael, this tiny girl who would need him to protect her in ways both the same and different from his son. They named her Sarah, after Nathan's mother, who cried when they told her. Michael was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly, trying to share his toys with her even though she was too small to appreciate them. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Michael and Sarah grew into happy, healthy children, their laughter filling the cabin and the ranch. Nathan was promoted to foreman when the previous foreman retired, a position that came with more responsibility but also more pay. He and Josephine were able to expand their cabin, adding another room and a proper kitchen. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson grew older, eventually turning over more of the ranch operations to their sons, though they remained active and engaged. They doted on Michael and Sarah, treating them like grandchildren, and the ranch continued to prosper under the family's careful management. Josephine still gathered wildflowers every spring, now with her children helping her, teaching them the names and properties just as she had once taught Nathan. Sometimes Nathan would watch them from a distance, his heart full, remembering that first day when he had seen her alone among the blooms and made the terrifying decision to stop and speak to her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Josephine back to the exact spot where they had met. He had planned it carefully, arranging for Mrs. Patterson to watch the children, packing a picnic lunch. They rode out together in the morning, and when they reached the place, Josephine gasped with delight. The wildflowers were in full bloom, a riot of color spreading across the landscape. Nathan had brought a blanket, and they sat together among the blossoms, eating and talking and remembering. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked at one point. "Staying instead of moving on to California or somewhere else? Do you wonder what your life might have been like if you had made a different choice?" Josephine looked at him seriously for a moment, then shook her head. "Not for one second. Yes, my life would have been different, but I cannot imagine it being better. You gave me a home, Nathan. Not just the cabin or the ranch, but a true home with you and our children. You gave me a family again after I lost the one I was born into. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Nathan said. "That you feel fulfilled, that you do not feel like you gave up too much." "I gave up nothing and gained everything," Josephine said firmly. "I love my life, Nathan. I love our children, our home, our community, and most of all, I love you. That has never changed, not for one moment in these 10 years. Nathan kissed her then, long and deep, tasting sunshine and happiness. When they broke apart, Josephine smiled and added, "Although I do have some news that might make you even happier." "What is that?" "I am pregnant again," Josephine said. "I have been meaning to tell you, but I wanted to wait for the right moment, and this seemed perfect." Nathan let out a whoop of joy, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed. A third child. Another blessing to add to the abundance they already had. "How do you keep making me the happiest man in the world?" Nathan asked, setting her down carefully. "It is a talent," Josephine teased. Their third child was another boy born in early winter. They named him Thomas, and he proved to be the most rambunctious of their children, keeping them constantly busy. Michael and Sarah adapted to their new sibling with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Michael helpful and protective. Sarah occasionally jealous of the attention the baby received, but ultimately loving. As the children grew, Nathan made sure to spend individual time with each of them. He taught Michael to ride and work cattle, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. He let Sarah help with gentler ranch tasks, never discounting her abilities because she was a girl, and was rewarded with her fierce determination to prove herself. Thomas tagged along with everyone, absorbing lessons from all sides, his curiosity boundless. Josephine continued her work on the ranch, though as the children got older and more independent, she also began teaching at the small school in Mineral Park a few days a week. She loved working with the children, helping them learn their letters and numbers, and Nathan was proud of her dedication to education. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by challenges overcome and victories celebrated. There were difficult times too. A drought year when the cattle suffered and money was tight. An illness that swept through the ranch, making several people seriously sick, including Sarah, who frightened them all by developing a high fever that lasted for days. Moments when Nathan and Josephine argued, usually about finances or parenting decisions, learning to navigate disagreements while maintaining their love and respect for each other. But through it all, their commitment to each other never wavered. They had built something solid and true, a partnership based on mutual love and respect, on shared values and complementary strengths. They supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's successes, comforted each other through sorrows. When Michael turned 18 and announced that he wanted to work on the ranch full-time rather than pursue other opportunities, Nathan felt a complex mix of pride and concern. He wanted his son to have choices, to see the world beyond Mineral Park, but he also understood the pull of the land, the satisfaction of ranch work. He and Josephine talked it over carefully with Michael, making sure he understood that this was his decision to make, but that they would support him regardless. Sarah surprised everyone by declaring her intention to become a teacher like her mother. She moved to Prescott to attend the normal school there, and though Nathan missed her terribly, he was immensely proud of her ambition and intelligence. Thomas, still young, changed his mind about his future plans almost weekly, but Nathan was not concerned. His youngest son had time to figure out his path. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Josephine. He went to his workshop and retrieved a project he had been working on for months, an intricately carved wooden box with a beautiful inlaid design of wildflowers on the lid. Inside, he had placed letters he had written to her over the years, love notes and memories, a record of their life together. When Josephine opened the gift later that morning, she cried, reading through the letters with trembling hands. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she whispered. "You gave me our life," Nathan said simply. "This is just a small token of my gratitude." They celebrated quietly that evening, just the two of them, having arranged for the children to stay with friends. They sat on their porch watching the sunset, holding hands, comfortable in the silence that came from years of knowing each other deeply. "Do you remember what I asked you that first anniversary?" Nathan said eventually. "Whether you thought we would always be this happy." "I remember," Josephine said. "And you said we would have challenges, but that we would face them together." "I was right," Nathan said. "We have had challenges. But we have also had so much joy, so much love, and I am just as happy now as I was then. More even, because now I have all these memories to treasure along with the present." "I feel the same," Josephine said softly. "Sometimes I think about that day you found me picking wildflowers, and I wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped, if you had not picked up the courage to speak to me, to ask me to stay." "I think about that too," Nathan admitted. "And every time I do, I thank God that I was brave enough to take that chance." "So do I," Josephine said. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, watching their ranch, their home, their life spread out before them, Nathan felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, though they had certainly had their share of those, but this quiet, steady love that had carried them through 20 years and would carry them through however many more they were granted. The years continued to unfold. Michael married a sweet young woman named Emma, who was the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Nathan found himself experiencing his own father's emotions. Watching his son stand at the altar, making the same promises Nathan had made so many years before. Sarah completed her education and returned to Mineral Park to teach at the local school, eventually meeting and marrying a merchant who had recently moved to town. Thomas, after much deliberation, decided to try his hand at business, working in one of the growing towns in the territory with an eye toward eventually opening his own mercantile. Nathan and Josephine became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. They watched their grandchildren with the same wonder they had felt with their own children, marveling at the continuation of their legacy. Sometimes Nathan would take his grandchildren to the spot where he had first met Josephine, showing them the wildflowers and telling them the story of how their grandmother had changed his life with a simple smile. As they moved into their middle years, Nathan's hair turned gray and Josephine's face showed the lines of a life well lived. But to Nathan, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her, and he made sure to tell her so regularly. They still took walks in the evenings when weather permitted, still held hands when they sat together, still found ways to make each other laugh. Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, and Mrs. Patterson followed him 6 months later, unable to live without the man she had loved for over 50 years. Their sons continued to run the ranch successfully, and Nathan remained on as foreman, his experience and knowledge invaluable. The Patterson sons made it clear that Nathan and Josephine would always have a place on the ranch, that their cabin would be theirs for as long as they wanted it. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a surprise celebration at the ranch. Nearly 100 people attended, testament to the lives Nathan and Josephine had built, the community they had become part of, the love they had shared so generously. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music, and through it all Nathan kept Josephine close, his arm around her waist, his heart full to bursting. When everyone finally left and they were alone in their cabin, Josephine turned to Nathan with tears in her eyes. "I cannot believe it has been 30 years. Best 30 years of my life," Nathan said, "and I mean that with everything I am." "Mine too," Josephine whispered. They were older now, their pace slower, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, matured, become something richer and more complex than the passionate romance of their youth. They knew each other completely now, the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses, and they loved each other not despite these things but because of them. Nathan eventually retired from his foreman position, though he still helped around the ranch when he could, unable to completely give up the work that had been his life. Josephine reduced her teaching hours, but continued working with a few students who needed extra help, her love of education as strong as ever. They spent more time together now, often sitting on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. They talked about the past, about their children and grandchildren, about the life they had built together. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, no words needed after so many years. On a warm spring evening 35 years after their wedding, they were sitting on that porch when Josephine suddenly pointed toward the meadow beyond their cabin. "Look," she said softly. Nathan followed her gaze and saw what had caught her attention. The wildflowers were in full bloom, the same varieties that had been growing that day so long ago when he had first seen her. The setting sun illuminated them, making them glow as though lit from within. "Should we walk out there?" Nathan asked. Josephine nodded, and they stood slowly, their movements more careful than they used to be, but still sure. Hand in hand, they walked toward the flowers, and as they reached them, Nathan was struck by the rightness of the moment. This was where their story had begun, and here they were, still together, still in love. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Josephine asked. "You said something in your chest told you that you needed to convince me to stay." "I remember," Nathan said. "It was the truest thing I have ever felt." "I am glad you listened to that feeling," Josephine said. I am glad you picked up the courage to ask me to stay." "So am I," Nathan said, pulling her close. "Every single day I am grateful for that courage." They stood together among the wildflowers as the sun set, casting everything in golden light. Nathan looked at his wife, seeing the young woman who had stolen his heart superimposed over the face he knew so well now, and felt his love for her wash over him in waves. "I love you, Josephine," he said. "I have loved you for 35 years, and I will love you forever." "Forever," Josephine echoed, smiling up at him. "I like the sound of that." They kissed, soft and sweet, surrounded by wildflowers and bathed in sunset light. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined. And as they walked slowly back to their cabin hand in hand, Nathan knew that whatever time they had left, whether it was years or decades, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic rescue. It was simply the story of a cowboy who found a woman picking wildflowers and picked up the courage to ask her to stay. And she had stayed, and together they had built something wonderful. A family, a home, a love that would endure. The years continued to pass gently. Nathan and Josephine settled into the comfortable rhythm of their later years, surrounded by family and friends, their lives full of the kind of quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. Michael took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself as capable as his father had been. Sarah's school flourished, her reputation as an excellent teacher spreading throughout the territory. Thomas opened his mercantile and was doing well, visiting his parents regularly and always making them laugh with his stories of town life. The grandchildren multiplied, and Nathan and Josephine's cabin became a gathering place for family celebrations. They hosted Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas gatherings, birthday parties and Sunday suppers, their home always open and welcoming. Josephine still made her wildflower arrangements, showing her granddaughters how to select the best blooms and preserve them. Nathan still told stories of the old days, teaching his grandsons about the land and the cattle. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by their entire family, a joyous occasion that lasted all day. The children had arranged for a photographer to come from Prescott, and the family posed for a formal portrait, 3 generations together. When Nathan saw the finished photograph weeks later, he was struck by the visible evidence of their legacy. All of these people, these lives, had come from that single moment of courage when he had stopped his horse to speak to a woman picking wildflowers. As they moved into their 60s, Nathan's health began to show signs of decline. Nothing dramatic, just the natural wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many years. His joints ached in the cold, he tired more easily, his hands sometimes trembled. Josephine remained strong, though she too moved more slowly, her back sometimes paining her. But even as their bodies aged, their love remained constant. They adapted to their limitations, finding new ways to spend time together. When Nathan could no longer take long walks, they sat on the porch and watched the world go by. When Josephine's eyes grew too tired for extended reading, Nathan read to her in the evenings, just as she had once read to their children. On a clear autumn morning 42 years after their wedding, Nathan woke feeling unusually tired. Josephine noticed immediately, her eyes sharp with concern. "Are you feeling well?" she asked. "Just tired," Nathan assured her. "Nothing to worry about." But as the day progressed, Nathan felt increasingly weak. He tried to hide it, not wanting to alarm Josephine, but she knew him too well. By evening, she insisted on sending for the doctor, and Michael rode to town despite Nathan's protests that he was fine. The doctor examined Nathan carefully, his expression growing grave. When he finished, he took Josephine aside and spoke quietly, but Nathan could see the fear in her face when she returned to sit beside him. "What did he say?" Nathan asked, though he thought he could guess. "Your heart is weak," Josephine said, her voice trembling slightly. "He says you need to rest, to take things easy. No more work, no more exertion." Nathan nodded slowly, not particularly surprised. He had felt something changing in his body, a fundamental tiredness that went beyond normal fatigue. "How long?" he would not say, Josephine said. "But Nathan, you have to follow his instructions. You have to rest." "I will," Nathan promised, taking her hand. "I have no intention of leaving you any sooner than I have to." The next few months were an adjustment. Nathan chafed at his limitations, frustrated by his body's weakness. But Josephine was firm, enforcing the doctor's orders with gentle determination. The family rallied around them, Michael and Emma moving into a cabin nearby so they could help, Sarah visiting several times a week, Thomas coming home from his store whenever he could. Despite the circumstances, Nathan found a strange peace in this slower pace of life. He had time to sit and think, to reflect on his life and appreciate all that he had experienced. He watched his grandchildren play and marveled at their energy and joy. He held Josephine's hand and told her all the things he wanted to make sure she knew, declarations of love and gratitude that sometimes made her cry. As winter approached, Nathan grew weaker. He spent most of his time in bed now, conserving his strength, but he remained clear-minded and present. Josephine rarely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, holding his hand through the long nights. On a cold December morning, Nathan woke to find snow falling softly outside their window. Josephine was already awake, sitting beside him, and when he turned his head to look at her, she smiled, though tears tracked down her cheeks. "It is snowing," Nathan said softly. "Yes," Josephine whispered. "Beautiful, is it not?" Nathan managed a small nod. His breathing was labored now, each breath requiring effort. He knew what was coming, had known for weeks, and while he was not ready to leave, he also felt a strange acceptance. "I need you to know," Nathan said, his voice weak but clear, "that you made my life extraordinary. From that very first moment, you transformed everything. I have been so blessed to love you and be loved by you." "Do not talk like that," Josephine said, though her tears fell faster. "You are not leaving me yet." "Soon, though," Nathan said gently. "And I need you to promise me something." "Anything?" "Promise me you will keep living," Nathan said. "That you will not let grief consume you, stay close to our children and grandchildren, keep teaching, keep gathering your wildflowers, live, Josephine, for both of us." "I cannot," Josephine sobbed. "I cannot imagine life without you." "You can," Nathan insisted, using what little strength he had to squeeze her hand. "You are the strongest person I know, and I will always be with you in every wildflower, in every sunset, in every moment of beauty. You will not lose me, not really." Michael and the rest of the family were called, and they gathered around Nathan's bed as his breathing grew more shallow. Sarah held her mother while Michael held his father's other hand, and Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, his face streaked with tears. The grandchildren were kept away, too young to fully understand what was happening but old enough to know that something important and sad was occurring. As the snow continued to fall and the winter light faded toward evening, Nathan looked at each of his children, his eyes conveying all the love and pride he felt. Then his gaze returned to Josephine, and he smiled one last time. "My wildflower girl," he whispered, "I will love you forever." And then, peacefully, surrounded by love, Nathan Reynolds closed his eyes for the final time. The grief was profound and overwhelming. Josephine felt as though she had been cut in half, losing the partner who had been her companion for over 4 decades. The funeral was well attended. nearly everyone in Mineral Park and the surrounding area coming to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved. They buried Nathan in the small cemetery outside town, beneath a cottonwood tree, with a simple marker bearing his name and the dates of his life. For weeks afterward, Josephine moved through her days in a fog of sorrow. She went through the motions of living but felt hollow inside, unable to imagine how she would continue without Nathan. Sarah stayed with her, as did Emma, neither wanting to leave her alone. They cooked and cleaned and tried to comfort her, but Josephine felt beyond comfort. Then one morning in early spring, almost 3 months after Nathan's death, Josephine woke to find the desert blooming. The wildflowers were starting to emerge, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the brown landscape. Without consciously deciding to do so, Josephine found herself walking out to the meadow where she had first met Nathan, where they had returned so many times over the years. The flowers were not yet in full bloom, but they were coming, pushing up through the earth with determined vitality. Josephine knelt among them, her hands touching the delicate petals, and for the first time since Nathan's death, she felt something other than grief. She felt his presence, as clearly as if he were standing beside her, and she heard his voice in her memory asking her to live, to keep going, to honor their love by embracing life rather than surrendering to sorrow. She began to cry, but these tears felt different, cleansing rather than devastating. She cried for what she had lost, but also for what she had been given, for the incredible gift of 42 years with a man who had loved her completely and whom she had loved in return. "I promise," she whispered to the flowers, to the sky, to Nathan wherever he was. "I promise I will keep living." And slowly, painfully, she did. She returned to teaching, finding solace in working with the children, in passing on knowledge and encouraging young minds. She spent time with her own children and grandchildren, discovering that being a grandmother and great-grandmother brought its own joys. She continued gathering wildflowers, keeping them in her home as she always had, each bloom a reminder of Nathan and the love they had shared. Years passed, and the acute pain of loss gradually transformed into a gentler, more bearable ache. Josephine never stopped missing Nathan, never stopped wishing he was still beside her. But she learned to carry her grief while also experiencing joy, to hold both sorrow and happiness in the same heart. She told stories about Nathan to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words. She showed the grandchildren and great-grandchildren the carved box he had made for their 20th anniversary, reading them the letters inside so they would know what kind of man their grandfather had been. She took them to his grave and to the meadow where they had met, sharing the story of how a cowboy had found a woman picking wildflowers and picked up the courage to ask her to stay. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, Josephine returned to the meadow alone. She was 70 years old now, her body showing the wear of a long life, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit strong. She knelt among the wildflowers, in the exact spot where she had been kneeling that long-ago day when Nathan had first seen her. 50 years, she said aloud. "We should be celebrating together today, you stubborn man, but I suppose life had other plans." She arranged the flowers she had gathered into a small bouquet, her practiced hands moving with familiar efficiency. As she worked, she talked to Nathan as though he could hear her, telling him about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about all the small details of life he had missed. "I have kept my promise," she said finally. "I have kept living. It has not always been easy, and there have been days when I wanted nothing more than to lie down and join you. But I have lived, Nathan. I have loved our children and watched our grandchildren grow. I have taught hundreds of students and made a difference in this community we built together. I have honored our love by living fully, just as you asked me to." The wind picked up, rustling through the flowers, and Josephine felt that sense of presence again, that certainty that Nathan was somehow there with her. She smiled through her tears and gathered up her bouquet, standing slowly. "I will see you again someday," she said softly. "And when I do, I hope you will still think I am as beautiful as you always told me I was. But until then, I will keep going, for both of us." She walked back to her cabin, the cabin she had shared with Nathan for so many years, and placed the wildflowers in a vase on the table. Then she sat down to write letters to her children, telling them she loved them, making plans for the future. Josephine lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged in her community until nearly the very end. She taught until she was 75, finally retiring when her eyesight began to fail. She saw several more great-grandchildren born, holding them and blessing them and telling them about the legacy of love they came from. She remained in her cabin on the Patterson Ranch, which was now run by Michael and his sons, still an integral part of the ranch family. On a warm spring morning, just after the wildflowers had reached their peak bloom, Josephine Sterling Reynolds passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had once shared with Nathan. She was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Her funeral was as well attended as Nathan's had been, testament to the impact she had made on her community. They buried her beside Nathan beneath the cottonwood tree, their markers side by side, reunited in death as they had been in life. Years later, their great-grandchildren would still visit the meadow where Nathan had first seen Josephine, gathering wildflowers and telling the story to their own children. The story of a cowboy who found a woman picking wildflowers and picked up the courage to ask her to stay. The story of how she stayed, and how together they built a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. The wildflowers continued to bloom every spring, vivid and beautiful against the harsh desert landscape, a living reminder that courage and love can transform everything, that a single moment of bravery can change the course of a life. And if you listened carefully when the wind blew through those flowers, you might almost hear echoes of laughter, whispers of love, the story of Nathan and Josephine repeated over and over in the rustling petals. Their story did not end with death, because true love never really ends. It lives on in the children who carry forward their values, in the community they helped build, in every person who hears their story and is inspired to be brave, to take chances, to choose love even when it is frightening. It lives in every wildflower that blooms in that meadow, in every sunset over the Arizona desert, in every act of courage big and small. Nathan had picked up the courage to ask Josephine to stay, and she had stayed. Together they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love story that would be remembered and retold long after they were gone. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest legacy of all, not wealth or fame or grand achievements, but simply this. They had loved each other well and truly, had built a family and a home, had made their small corner of the world a little bit better for having been in it. Their cabin on the Patterson Ranch, now owned and maintained by their descendants, became something of a landmark in the family. Michael's grandson eventually turned it into a small museum of sorts, preserving Nathan and Josephine's belongings, displaying the carved wooden box and the letters, the photographs and the simple possessions that told the story of their life. Visitors would come, family members and sometimes others from the community, to see where Nathan and Josephine had lived and to remember their story. The meadow where they first met was preserved as well, protected by the family so that the wildflowers would continue to bloom year after year. It became a tradition for couples in the family to have their wedding photographs taken there, standing among the same flowers that had witnessed the beginning of Nathan and Josephine's love story. And so their story continued, not as ghosts or spirits, but as memory and inspiration, as the foundation upon which generations built their own lives and loves. Every spring when the wildflowers bloomed, someone in the family would make the trip to the meadow, would stand where Nathan had stopped his horse and seen Josephine kneeling among the blossoms. They would remember, and in remembering, they would honor not just Nathan and Josephine, but the courage it takes to love, to commit, to build a life with another person. The story of the cowboy who found a woman picking wildflowers and picked up the courage to ask her to stay became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of a single moment, a single decision, to change everything. It reminded those who heard it that life is full of such moments, opportunities for courage that can lead to joy beyond imagining if only we are brave enough to seize them. And in the end, that was what Nathan and Josephine's story truly was about, not just romance or love, though it certainly contained both in abundance, but courage. The courage to stop and speak to a stranger, the courage to stay instead of moving on. The courage to trust, to hope, to commit, to build. The courage to love fully even knowing that all things end, that heartbreak is inevitable, but that the joy of loving makes it worthwhile nonetheless. Their story became a gift passed down through generations, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the moments when we push past our fear and do the brave thing, say the hard words, take the risk. It became a reminder that true love is not just feeling but action, not just passion but commitment, not just falling but staying and building and choosing each other every day. The wildflowers continued to bloom, season after season, year after year, generation after generation. And with each spring, with each burst of color across the desert landscape, the story was remembered and retold, kept alive by those who understood that some stories are worth preserving, that some loves are worth celebrating, that some acts of courage deserve to be honored and remembered. Nathan Reynolds and Josephine Sterling had lived and loved and built something beautiful together. They had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and created a legacy. And all of it, every moment of joy and sorrow, every triumph and trial had started with one simple act of courage. A cowboy finding a woman picking wildflowers and picking up the courage to ask her to stay. She had stayed, and that made all the difference.